Hey guys, Doc here with Internet Kidz Gaming. I'm going to give you guys a quick guide on how to make a cheap Whirlwind Barbarian, and I'm going to try to make it as quick as possible, but there's a little bit of theory crafting that goes into it, and there's going to be some decisions that you're going to have to make, so it might be a little bit longer than the normal video, but I'm going to keep it to a minimum to try to keep the time going as quick as possible here. Alright, so let's just get started right off the bat. Let's jump right into it. Let's just take a look at my stats. I've got 2294 strength. That's with level 4 Paragon. I haven't really delved too deep into the Paragon levels. Critical hit chance 38.5% and critical hit damage 399%. Now, you don't need your crit hit chance and your crit hit damage to be this high. I was doing just fine with 35% and 300 damage pre-patch 1.0.4. So now that the patch has dropped and everything's a little nerfed, the Paragon level's kicking in, you don't need as much as I have right here, but this is a good goal to shoot for, and you can actually get this pretty cheaply. You want to be over 35% crit hit chance. That just seems to be the sweet spot for me anyways, and crit hit damage over 300 is also a great sweet spot. Alright, let's go down to damage reduction. You'll notice my armor is 6413, and damage reduction is 68.13%. That goes up with some of the synergies that I have, some of the skills that I use, and you'll see that in a second. Alright, now as we go further down the stats here, you'll notice that my resistances are really low. Most people stack all resistance. I have chosen to ignore that, and I'll tell you why in a second. Well, actually, I'll just tell you why right now. It's because it's very cheap. If you ignore all resistance and only pick up resistance on pieces that it's cheap to come by on, you're not going to have a huge problem post-patch 104. The mobs hit a lot less hard, and I've noticed it comes into a little bit less play. You notice my vitality, too, is 849, leaving my health at 31,790. If you look in my headpiece, I have an experience gem in there instead of a percent life gem. So that's 31,790 without a life gem. Okay? And there's a reason for that. The reason is because I want to get my Paragon levels faster, and you honestly don't need as big of a health pool as a Barbarian. You're already taking 30% less damage just for being a Barb. You're taking, once you get the synergies in that I'm going to tell you about for the Whirlwind build, your resistances do not need to be that high. Alright, and then you'll notice my crowd control reduction is 12%. If you can pick up some crowd control reduction, this is great because the worst thing for a Whirlwind Barb is to be CC'd. When you lose control of your character as a Whirlwind Barb, that's when you're going to die. So Waller will kill you, Frozen will kill you, any of those types of things that make it so you can't keep moving will kill you. Okay, and as we go down, let's just take a quick look here at lifesteal and life per hit. These are pretty important for Whirlwind Barb. You're going to be dropping a lot of tornadoes, and each time those hit, you're going to be gaining life. So when you're hitting really hard for massive hits, your lifesteal actually becomes a viable stat. So 5.6% lifesteal. Prior to the patch, I had 3%. I just had one thing. It was my belt with lifesteal on it. Now I've got a couple things. And you notice my life on hit's not that high. It's only 618 life on hit. But since you're going to be clumping enemies up, this works out really well. You're going to be getting a lot of return on life on hit, even at 618, because your tornadoes are going to be hitting pretty hard. If you take a look at my weapons, I'm going to tell you how to keep it cheap here. Okay, look at my offhand. This is the main way as a Whirlwind Barb you can save money. This offhand was very cheap because its damage was low. However, the way I've built this, you really only have to worry about main hand damage. So if you look at my main hand weapon, you'll see it's a 974 DPS weapon with 215 strength and a socket. You don't need a lot on your main hand weapon. Obviously, the more you have, the better. But this works just fine. It's got high strength and a socket. Those aren't considered to be very viable or great stats for a Whirlwind Barb, but they work very well in this build with the skills that I use. So I just dropped an 80% crit gem in there. I've got 215 strength on it, and it's high DPS. And it's a mace, so it's slow, it hits hard. That's what you want for your main hand to keep it cheap. The offhand is where you get all your stats. You'll notice I've got 618 life on hit on my offhand. That's where all my life on hit comes from. Critical hit damage on the weapon itself, 89%. Plus it's got conversion to life and a socket, so I've got 70% from the socket, 89% from the weapon, so my crit hit damage is way up. And then I was also able to find this one with Vitality. Now I think this weapon, if I remember correctly, only cost me 600k, but I'm getting a ton of stats off of this that are so useful, and it makes it so that you're able to go through Acts 1, 2, and 3 with relative ease. Act 4 can still be a little challenging, but remember, this is a budget build. And then some other things to watch out for. You can get pretty good resistance and percent life on shoulders. So you'll see that I only have 151 strength on my shoulders. But one thing that I've noticed with the new Paragon levels is you're gaining strength every time you gain a Paragon level. So you'll have to focus on that less and less, and you can start to replace it with things like crit hit damage, crit hit percent, or I'm sorry, crit hit chance, and resist all, which will become, more important when you hit Act 4. But then if you look at my hands, you'll see I've got 10% on the hands for crit hit chance, and then 4.5% on one ring and 4 on the other. All you need for your rings is strength and crit hit chance. Anything beyond that, you don't need all resist. Vitality is nice to pick up. Armor is nice to pick up. Because remember, your armor is going to reduce damage as well, and you're already taking that 30% less damage. So when I start showing you the skills here, you'll see the synergies on that. And here's my amulet. Now, a lot of people wouldn't consider this an excellent amulet, but I want you to take a look at it and think about it for a second. It's got 256 strength, which adds to my damage and to my armor. Okay, it's got crit hit damage increased by 60% and reduced duration of control impairing effects. All right, let's go down to the belt. You notice the belt is an easy place to get damage converted to life, and it's a great place to get strength. You can get a really high strength rating on your belt, and you can get that damage conversion, and you can get it for cheap. So, everything else is pretty self-explanatory. You just want to make sure on your boots, armor, vitality, strength, and movement speed. Those are so clutch on the boots. Movement speed is very important for this build because you want to be able to get in and out of mobs fast. And that's pretty much it for the gear. I mean, it's very self-explanatory. I've showed you my base stats. Whatever you have to do to get these stats, you just have to do it. Since you're not focusing as much on physical resistance or any of the other resistances, you can get your stats higher, and you can pick up some armor in place of all resist. You can pick up some extra vitality here, and you can kind of piecemeal together a set. So really the best way to keep this cheap is just to really completely ignore resist all. There's going to be a few places where you can get it cheap, like your shoulders and your pants. But beyond that, you really don't need much of it. I'd say 200 to 250 is a great starting point for this build. And let's go ahead and just get into the skills so I can just show you why. When you're doing this build, there's two things that are not going to be going anywhere. One is Whirlwind. Whirlwind is excellent. You have to have it. Whirlwind Hurricane is a nut and bolts part of this build. You can't get rid of it, so just get that in your head right now. Sprint and run like the wind, same thing. This increases your movement speed by 40% for 3 seconds, and it leaves tornadoes in your wake. Those tornadoes are going to be where you're getting a lot of your life on hit back. What you're going to do is, you'll notice Hurricane allows you to move at your whirlwind speed, at your movement speed while using Whirlwind. Sprint increases your movement speed by 40%. So you're going to sprint and Whirlwind. And you're going to pop sprint and Whirlwind through all the mobs in a circle, and that's going to give you all your life on hit back. All right, let's go into the skills that I use. Bash. I use Bash with Punish. All right. Generates the most fury per attack for a primary attack, which is nice when you're trying to build up that fury in the beginning. The only downside to it is the knockback. You really don't want to be knocking back as much, but it's a great trade-off for the fury generation. Punish. I picked this rune because it increases the damage of your skills by 8% for 5 seconds after using Bash. So as long as you're throwing in a Bash here and there, you're always going to have that kind of base 8% increase in your overall damage, which is great. It makes your Whirlwind hit harder, makes your Sprint Tornadoes hit harder. So it's a great synergy effect with your primary attack. All right, Battle Rage. I use Into the Fray with this. Some people use other things, but I like that extra Fury generation. The last thing you want to be in this build is Fury Starved, and it's a great, there is some positioning and stuff that's involved in a Whirlwind build, and by having this, it allows you to mess up a couple times in your positioning of your tornadoes before you start to notice a real big drop in fury. So always keep Battle Rage up. It increases your crit hit chance, it increases your damage, and it lasts for 30 seconds. So that's probably the best combo right there. If you look at the runes, let's see here. Swords of Plowshare isn't that great. Marauder's Rage is okay. It increases the bonus damage to 30%, but you're not getting that Fury generation. And Bloodshed is pretty good, but it gives you kind of an AoE. But I've always just wound up going back to Into the Fray. It just seems to be the best. So, all right, let's go on to these last two skills. Wrath of the Berserker. You'll notice right now I have Thrive on Chaos. That's because when I'm kind of farming a lot of trash, it keeps Wrath of the Berserker up a lot longer, which is kind of cool. But to be quite honest, most of the time, I use Insanity. I've used Thrive on Chaos. I've used Slaughter, which is nice, but Insanity seems to be the best because Wrath of the Berserker usually comes back up by the time you hit another elite mob, and it allows you to get 100% damage increase, which is great for quickly downing packs of elite monsters. So I just like to use Insanity. That's kind of the rune on there is kind of one that you can play around with. It gives you some like leeway in this build, but Wrath of the Berserker, you definitely want that. Warcry. All right, and this is why you're able to keep your resistances so low, and this is why you can ignore it to a certain extent. It's because it gives you a 50% bonus to your resistances. So it's already increasing your armor, and it adds on top of that a bonus to your resistance. So if your armor is really high and your resistances are really low, it's going to give you a really good chunk of increase on your armor, and it's going to give you a pretty decent chunk of increase on your resistances. So when I'm running around Act 3, I'm actually at 400 resist all, which is more than enough to make sure that I don't die or don't get one-shotted. There's still a few types of mobs because my resistances are a little bit lower. You know, if I get walled into an arcane orb, I mean, there's nothing I can do about that. And there's a few situations where you are going to die, but you know, for a budget build, this helps out so much. And then that's where the synergy also comes in here. Superstition reduces all non-physical damage by 20%. So basically, you're adding a 20% reduction on top of your all resistance. So that's such a huge bonus. I use this because there's other damage ones I could be using, but this one makes more sense and it allows you to spend less on your gear. And also, whenever you take damage from a range or elemental attack, you have a chance to gain 3 Fury. So that synergizes with Into the Fray from Battle Rage, and it keeps your Fury up pretty high throughout the whole thing. So I don't really get Fury starved anymore. And I'm able to get my gear on the cheap side. Then we go over to my other passive skill, Weapons Master. This is a no-brainer. You know, you're going to be main-handing an axe. It gives you critical hit chance. You're going to be main-handing a mace, usually, and it gives you critical hit chance. Maces are nice and slow. They hit hard, and you get that bonus of crit hit chance, which is such a good thing for Whirlwind. It helps you get to that 35% so much faster. And lastly, we have Ruthless. Critical hit chance increased by 5%, critical hit damage increased by 50%. So I'm passively giving myself 15% crit hit chance, and I'm passively giving myself 50% crit hit damage. When you take into effect all my skills, such as Battle Rage, things can get up pretty high. So you'll notice, if you look at my skills now that I've used Warcry and Battle Rage, you'll notice, let's see here, my crit hit chance is up 41% from that, and you'll see how my damage went up almost 10,000 just from that extra 3 or 4% that I got. Oh, I'm sorry, that extra 3% that I got from Battle Rage. So this is where your money's going to come in. Once you have this high of a critical hit damage increase, every point of critical hit chance is going to raise it so much. You see how they just went back down? Look at this. 41%, 10k damage increase. And that's going to be up all the time. Now look at your Wrath of the Berserker. Critical hit chance by 10%. So that's going to put me up to 51%. So eventually my damage is going to get really astronomical. Now I'm just going to go ahead and go out and do an area real quick. and show you what kind of damage I can get with Wrath of the Berserker, what it's going to be at. Let me get some Fury up here before I attack something. Doodle-doo-doo-doo. Gotta find some doo-doo mobs. Sorry, I've been kind of messing around, but this will just give you a quick idea of... Alright, so once I get my rage up here, I'm going to pop Wrath of the Berserker, and then I'm going to show you what my damage is at. Alright. 89k. Not too shabby. Let's fight this pack right here since we're right here. Yeah, and they went down like they weren't even there. So there you have it. That's the cheap Whirlwind Barb build. If you like this video, or if you have any questions, just feel free to leave a comment below if you need me to get more in depth. I didn't want to get too crazy with it, assuming some of you had a base knowledge of how this build worked. But the key takeaway points here are, offhand weapons are a great way to save money, and by adding in Superstition and Warcry with Impunity, you can ignore all resists. So just make sure you get a solid, cheap offhand. You can get a killer offhand for around 1,000,000 gold, which is going to save you so much money when you take everything into consideration with this build. And by using those skills that I told you, it negates a lot of the damage you're going to take in Act 2 and 3. You're going to have to spend the money probably to be very successful in farming Act 4. But you can struggle through Act 4 with this gear and this build. So, alright, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you guys later.